Hello, everybody. Today I was going to talk a little bit about Beyond Borders project. We were going to look into Africa in particular, look at the electronics industry going on in Africa. Typically, we try to do this a couple times a week and just study basically what's going on around the world with different industries and get a better perspective for what's going on. But Africa has a very interesting economy because it's so fragile. It's basically very developing and changing constantly. And as we'll see, you can see a lot of the exports are actually going to China, believe it or not, and the United States and Europe. So we're going to kind of take a look at some of these. You can see this is in the billions of dollars. So the total exports for Africa is about $610 billion total. But particularly for the electronics industry, you can see here that it does kind of change. You can see that basically they've seen a doubling of the electronics industry since about 2010. In Asia, so that's basically Asia's taken most of the big parts of the electronics industry for exports, but Africa also has quite a lot of change as well. So it's just so small to see down here at the bottom chart that you can see that it's basically also has almost doubled or even tripled, and in some cases. You can see right here, so it says Americas, so it goes from 33.8 billion all the way up to 57.3 billion, so almost doubling in Africa too, but just really hard to see on that graph. So in terms of electronics, a lot of that is actually going to Europe, believe it or not, particularly in France. It's surprising to see how important France is in the continent of Africa, basically because of the language, and then obviously there's English speaking and some Portuguese speaking, and then a lot of Arabic in the northern part of Africa. So, but French is a particularly important language, and so obviously France is kind of pivotal in what's going on in the electronics industry for Africa. You'll notice that there's like a cell phone company from France that also operates in Africa as well. But in general, here you see France is basically the biggest player in the electronics industry, and then Spain, and then Germany. And so basically Europe basically has a lot better understanding of what's going on. So Europeans, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly because of their vicinity, you'd say Europe basically knows what's going on. For Africa, a lot better than other places. And that's kind of an interesting fact. So what are they actually doing? So they're doing insulation for vehicles, aircrafts, and ships. And then they're doing a lot of electronic conductors. And then you can see components, right? So then they get into monitors and transistors. And then electrical switches. So it's basically smaller components being built in Africa, as well as television equipment. So basically we want to use some artificial intelligence to kind of see what's going on. We used two different versions right here. I used Gemini 3, and then we also used ChatGPT to kind of compare. I was a little bit happier with different results from each one, so there's important to see what's going on. So if you're not familiar with Africa, basically the mobile phone things are basically what's going on in Africa. A lot of people are doing pretty interesting things in the mobile phone market. MTN and Safaricom are perhaps the biggest two companies for mobile in Africa. And you can see it on their employee size. So let's take a look at what's going on for them, particularly in Nairobi, Kenya. So there's basically, as you look at Africa, basically there's Eastern Africa, there's Western Africa over here, and then there's North Africa up in the top here, and then South Africa. And it's basically divided into, most people divide it into Sub-Saharan Africa, so everything south of the border here is basically considered Sub-Saharan Africa. But there's definitely a difference between the technology going on in East Africa versus West Africa. A lot of that is going into Nigeria, whereas here it happens in Kenya and some other areas like Tanzania and Uganda. So let's jump right in and find out a little bit more about MTN. We're going to open them up in a new tab and see where they're located in Johannesburg. So one interesting thing about Johannesburg, if you're not familiar with Johannesburg, let's zoom out. My mom actually lived in Johannesburg for a little while. But it's basically on the tip of Africa here. It's one of the largest cities. It's actually got a lot of electricity and power lines going into Johannesburg. I think they even have nuclear power there. So if you look at the other maps, I have some electrical maps here. Let's see if we can find these. There's one in here that has the whole electrical map for the world, and we can take a look at that one really quick. But if you're not familiar with it, all these maps are pretty helpful. They kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. But when you look at this map, this gives you a pretty good idea for what's going on in terms of electricity in Africa. And you can see right down here in Johannesburg, there's definitely a lot going on. Give me 1 second, I'm going to have to deal with my dog. So sorry about that. I was off recording this, but basically you can tell quite a lot from this map. So take a look at this. This is the openinformap.org right up here. And I can tell you quite a lot about what's going on. So let's look at MTN. So they're basically located down here in the southern tip of Africa. And they're going to have a pretty interesting office. Now, there's a lot of mining industry in here, so a lot of the wealth kind of transferred over from the mining industry into the electronics industry. And you can see this looks like a pretty standard corporate headquarters. But actually, I see a lot of activity of MTN even in Nigeria and other areas. But this is basically their office, maybe one of their headquarters. But let's see if we can get a view for what they look like. And you can see they have another building over here, so it's not just, this is their head office. And let's see if we can get into the street view here, but let's just look at what's going on. All right, we won't be able to get all the way in, but we can get kind of in here. So it looks like they got a kind of a gated innovation center. But it looks pretty nice. And then there's their logo outside. But basically one of the largest, if not the largest, telecom company in Africa. And they're doing quite well. As you can see, all these offices look pretty new. And the buildings look pretty nice in general. But let's see. They're having, it looks like they've actually split it up a bit, right? So there's some other companies back in here. I'm not sure what they're doing here, but let's see if we can look at from the highway or even from this side. We might be able to get a different perspective of MTN right here. And you can see pretty fantastically new buildings and quite advanced for what's going on in Africa. We were looking at Vietnam the other day and Mexico, sorry. And it was not nearly as nice as what we're seeing here in Africa. So kind of an interesting point of thing. So they've definitely spent a lot of money on the buildings here. And this is definitely a large facility in general for what's going on here. So let's back out and check out something else. So basically we're talking about MTN, 20,000 employees, 12 billion in revenue, largest mobile network operator in Africa. And basically, but I really like Safaricom. I've been looking at them. I've been going to some of their meetings, and they're really doing a good job of supporting other local businesses. They have kind of a good entrepreneurship meetup, and then they talk about funding the companies, and they're really cool. So you're going to see that their building is much smaller than MTN here, but this is their Safaricom. Is right next to the highway. I've already looked at this before, but we'll zoom in here and kind of see what the Safaricom looks like. So Safaricom, this is Safaricom here. Very different in Kenya. Much different situation than in South Africa. A lot more wealth, perhaps, but these buildings look a little more unique, in fact, in some ways. So you can see this is Safaricom. But then they have a Safaricom billboard here. See what their billboard says. Something with soccer, football. So pretty cool. And then they got these bicycles around quite often. Anyway, so basically, some of these other companies I'm not that as familiar with. I was trying to look at this one in Johannesburg as well. I couldn't really find a good positive link to them. But what you might want to do is look up for all the top entrepreneurs, the CEOs, and different people, and kind of do some research study for what's going on for them in Africa. It was pretty interesting to listen to an interview for some of these guys for Safaricom. I listened to him last night. It was an interesting interview. Just so different than what you hear from the Western side of the CEO business, but helpful to see. So you might want to try to do that. And then also with the different LLMs out there, I checked ChatGPT. This is quite different. They came up with this different one. I've never even heard of these guys, but this is the largest retailer, electronics retail business in Africa. So let's just look at them really quick, see if we can find. Called Incredible Connection. And wow, look at all these spots that they got here. So where are they? In Johannesburg. So again, this is another South African business, but let's zoom in and see. Wow, so quite a number of places. So if you're buying electronics, these guys are quite large, I would say, in general. Looks like this building is pretty large here, so let's look at this one. What's going on here? So this looks like a shopping mall of some sort in Johannesburg. And remember, if you're familiar with Elon Musk, he's actually from Johannesburg, South Africa. So there's actually quite a lot of wealth, and there's wealthy people, definitely. I mean, the world's most wealthiest person is actually originally from Johannesburg, right? So interesting to think about the details there. But you can see quite a number of others. That was quite interesting to see. I've had a really fun time looking up at some of these smaller companies, trying to contact some of the business owners. You see MTN, this is saying 50,000 people globally. So that's even larger number than what we saw from Gemini AI. So numbers may change. And then you can see there's this guy, which I haven't heard of, Technology Investments, largest investment conglomerate, and they're also in Cape Town. So let's look at them really quick, since they're a technology investment company. So if you're familiar with Cape Town, this is Cape Town. It actually didn't come up with an address for them, so somehow we're kind of missing them. Basically, Cape Town's right down here. The weather's kind of like California most year round. And it's a very beautiful environment overall. The Cape Town's got a lot of beaches, but it's a little bit spread out. Like Cape Town is up here, but most of the beaches are down, like along this coast here, and then also along here. So it's a little bit far to get to the beach. But this is the downtown Cape Town. Not super ginormous, but an interesting city nonetheless. They got some universities here. And a lot of other cool stuff going on. So definitely a cool city, one of the coolest in Africa, and also diverse too. There is a lot of white people in Cape Town as well, so interesting to think about. But we couldn't really come up with them, so let's see if we can get let's do one more search for them, see what this shows. Okay, yeah, I've seen their building before. So it says Media 24 on the side of them. But yeah, this is their building. Looks like, and some more details about their company if you're interested. But definitely take a look at both ChatGPT and Gemini if you're trying to do some research on this. But let's go back to the final kind of like overview here. So basically, the thing that we really need to think about is how France and Europe is actually interconnected with Africa. It's really hard to be in a different time zone. So one thing I found is that working with Mexico is pretty easy, as well as Canada for the United States. And there's, like we studied the other day, Mexico has a lot of electronics companies right on the border with the United States. And I think what we're seeing here is that we're basically seeing, because it's in the same time zone, a lot of that low-cost electronics manufacturing could actually potentially be moved into Africa and some places for Europe and other things like that. So there's a lot of growth there, and certainly being at the lower end of the scale, there's going to be a lot of changes in the future. Anyway, I hope this has helped you understand what's going on for Africa. Thank you so much. See you later.